The test. It's a test. Hey, Richard. Hey, Richard. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but he's muted too.
Oh, you're muted too.
So whatever he, remember whatever he does.
Yes,
I'll
yes,
say
I can
it.
hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to have you meet another Richard, a big Israel guy who was in Sinai at 75.
Great, great. Nice to meet you. Now, were you in the Sinai at age 75 or in
Actually,
75?
73 and earlier. Yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah. So this Richard spoke at Yom Kippur in Michael's Yom Kippur slot for me last year. We'll probably have him back this year.
Wait, Judy, I need you to use the mic so I hear you.
Yeah, but I don't want the whole room to hear us. Oh, and I got somebody else for you to meet. And we're gonna have you meet afterwards too. This is our JCRC director, Jeff Bloomer, who you have to bet.
Hello, pleasure to meet you. Yeah, we'll get to know each other
You have to get
a little
down.
bit. Oh, sorry.
There's my baby.
So nice to meet you. Looking forward to the program.
See, my tradition is wherever I speak, I bring a mug with the rabbi's grandchildren on the mug.
Good.
Very nice.
So Jeff is our JCRC director, and we have big plans for you for all of Dayton, not just Temple Bethel.
Sure.
So I will email you and him after today. I just wanted to have you see a face. I don't know if you can see a face.
I can. Send my regards to Kathy. She's a longtime friend.
Great.
Or I miss her. I read her column Whim, and
Yes.
I think it's just superb.
Great. I will pass that on to her. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, you ready?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Wait, not till I get that coffee pot off, or Dave. This is my very formal introduction. Watch that last coffee pot, because those of us who like regular coffee are concerned, so it's almost done.
All right. Good morning.
And so we open. In a perfect Israeli brunch, we have to begin with our caffeination, right?
As always.
Your mic on?
Yes, it is.
So
Hi, Richard. I'm Ehud. See me well. Nice to meet you.
great. Please feel free to, oh, Cameron's here. I wrote 5 introductions to this event, but then I realized you're not here to listen to me, and you are actually here to listen to, is that feedback? To some experts on the movie.
See, we already started the conflict.
We're already fighting. I know, and this really is an event for me. I don't care about the rest of you. I know we have all been stressed. We have all been concerned. We have all been worried since actually 1973. But most recently, since October 7th, we have found ourselves in such an emotional place with the attack on Israel, Israel's response, the anti-Zionism on campus, which has slipped so quickly into the anti-Semitism around the world, that I feel like we talk a lot about having difficult conversations, but I haven't seen us really sit down and have those difficult conversations. And I think that a difficult conversation means that we have to understand our own hardened signs, but also understand that there are other sides and other ways of looking at things, and nuance, and talking about nuance is the beginning of us, I believe, having growth and maybe having a little less dis-ease. In Judaism, a argument is called a machlochet, a discussion, and it comes from the word chelek, and what that means, I think, is that there is a piece of truth for everybody's positions. And I know these two amazing people who are strong and are passionate, and yet they can also see the chelek of truth on other sides. And I think those are the prophets who will bring us through this difficult time. And so I've invited Richard Friedman, who let me have his big old bio in front of him. He was the executive director of the Birmingham Jewish Federation, Birmingham, Alabama, for 37 years, a brilliant fundraiser, a brilliant communal organizer, and also a journalist who has written and been written up in Wall Street Journal and the New York Jewish Times, Los Angeles Jewish Times, and I see his writing most often now in the Times of Israel. And since his retirement, he has created an Insight magazine for non-Jews to understand a little bit more about Israel. And then in his free time, he is a fundraiser and associate with an Ohio-based fundraising nonprofit consulting firm. So we can use all of that. More importantly than all, he has a great coffee mug. Here's your chance to hold up the mug. With our little grandchildren that we share, because the gift of life that Richard has brought into my life this last decade or more is that his beautiful daughter is married to my amazing son, and they have 2 great kids. And so he is speaking all over these last 7 or 8 months to people to teach about Israel and nuance, and I'm so happy to share with him. I also have Ehud Borovoy, who is he is not only an Israeli, he has been involved and a part of this temple since 2007 when he came to study over here in Dayton, and has become our Israel person. During the time that he has become a citizen here in America, he has also gotten married. We've got to name some of his kids. Today is his son's. Next week is his son's 2nd birthday, his 3rd birthday. He's having a birthday party this afternoon. He's taking all the leftovers to that. But what's unique about Ehud is he has the capacity to hear and to hear kids, I think, because he's come up to my high school and spoken to kids with such clarity and such understanding that I have never seen them understand Zionism or Israel as much as they do when Ehud speaks. He speaks to non-Jewish groups and Jewish groups alike, and really helps with all that. So with all that being said, I really want this program to be you and your opportunity to ask your questions, to make your statements. But I wrote them 4 questions because I'm a good Jewish girl, and I've already come down to the 3rd one, which is how do we talk to our kids and that kind of thing. So let's first begin with Richard and then Ehud just giving some kind of a statement, and then I'm going to ask my deep, difficult question, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd. So we'll start with Richard.
Sure. Well, Judy, thanks for that wonderful introduction. And it would be hard to imagine what our life would be without you being such an integral part of it. And we look forward to seeing you next weekend. So you asked the question, how do we talk to our kids? I'm going to take the liberty of reframing that. And I think the question is, how do we listen to our kids? And I think that is the challenge, one of the many challenges that we are all to some degree navigating since October 7th. And because so many of us are so passionate and much more steeped in history and life experience than our kids, our grandkids, that the challenge is sharing with them perspectives, insights, information, without inadvertently marginalizing them or delegitimizing them. Now, many, if not most of us, if not all of us, were in college. We remember those heady years when we thought we knew more than anybody. I was in college in the late 60s. And it was a time of demonstrations, rebellions, questioning, challenging, blazing new paths, often at odds with my parents' generation. And I think we ought not ever forget that. And I think we should acknowledge that that's healthy. That's what growth and education and the experience is about. The challenge that we face today is, unlike the 60s, that everything is exacerbated by social media. It's magnified in a way that none of us could have even imagined 20 years ago. And thus, the conversation is much harder once it gets off the rails to get it back on the rails. And it just goes on and on and on. And we're striving to connect with, talk to, listen to a generation who relies mainly on social media for their information. So it's all very complex. As Judy said, since October 7th, I'm retired as Federation Director, but I volunteered to help our Federation, mainly speaking to non-Jewish groups, churches, civic clubs, business organizations, etc., but also to Jewish groups like we're doing today. Mainly, I know there's some people here who are friends of our community and interested in learning more. And one of the things I've tried to do is expose myself to dialoguing with some of these younger people to really try to understand what they're saying. And the hard part, and here's where I'm going to end, and I'll hand it over to Ehud. The hard part is keeping your seatbelt fastened while they say such objectionable and uninformed things, and not inadvertently pouncing, lecturing, pontificating, and alienating. So in addition to the content of it, there's a very challenging human relations dynamic to it, in family relations dynamic to this. And we just have to continue to work at it. We have to own it and recognize it and work at it.
Thank you for that, Richard. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for having me here, Judy, as well. Before I start, my answers sometimes might be shorter because Richard had given so much out of my answer from one perspective that I don't want to repeat myself too much. But I was born and raised in Israel, and I came here in 2007 when I was 27 years old. So I've been to the military. I brought some things here from my military time if anybody wants after that to come and see. But caveat on Richard's answer, social media is one of the thorns in our lives nowadays, in addition to being the benefits of our lives. But not only that it's being aggravated and excavated or being built up by social media, all the responses, but it's also being manipulated pretty well. And that is one of the challenges that we face, that I see on a daily basis, also as a younger generation seen on social media, and it hurts me as well. In addition to that, I'm a father of 2 little kids that I've already have experienced some type of discomfort or turmoil because we have friends that are Palestinians that went to school with my daughter and my son. So one of the things that is very difficult, and even today I'm being challenged, which is hard for me. And one of the things that I strive, I will give you my personal opinion. I will not give you necessarily facts all the time. I will give you what I think. So if somebody have a problem with that, this is why we are here for, right? Please accept that in the same way I accept everybody else. But one of the challenges are, my daughter has some friends at school, and when she wants to have a play date, ever since October 7th, I was unable to invite that child to a play date because I already got refusal from the parents to attend one of our functions, which was her birthday after October 7th. Another challenge that's happening today, like Judy mentioned, my son is having a birthday party right after, so I don't think I'll be able to stay here a long time after. But one of the participants who are, even though were not invited privately, is another Palestinian friend of mine who's coming with their kids to the event. They agreed to show up. And that puts me also personally in a little bit of turmoil inside. How do we, like I said, listen to our kids in addition to speak to them? We are very good nowadays, especially Jews and Israelis, in explaining things. I think this is one of our benefits, but also one of our disadvantages. We use a lot of our brain, where the other side, or the rest of the world sometimes uses more their emotions to convey something that might be distorted. Not all of it is just distorted. Let's be honest and frank. Some of it is not good from our perspective as well. But at the same time, the picture is painted in a way that is not truthful all the time. So, and that's a difficult part. How do I approach that to the kids? Just be honest with them from my perspective. Try to educate as much as possible on their level, because we can be all sophisticated and give history and facts, blah, blah, blah. They don't care. They, like we said here, they are following a lot of the social media that is tapping to their emotions. So recognizing their emotions and tying that to the facts and how they can understand that sometimes by giving examples from current life that you can use. Something that happened in school, something that happened to you guys in the day-to-day that can be translated, even though not to the severity of what is going on, but maybe, oh, do you know what this is happening this way? That might have happened because of that, and try to relate it, especially for the younger kids, if they have questions. The older ones, let them discuss, let them have some conversations and see if they can comprehend as much as possible. That's what I think.
And can I just ask you to do one more piece of that, which is what we understand and see the divisions here in Israel, what here in America, but what about in Israel? Is there a division, a generation gap? Is there a political splitting? When we see people say, stop the war, bring home the hostages, are they, are those peaceniks versus hawks, etc.?
I can only give you information that I receive as well. Being here in Dayton and far away from my country, I'm also being fed by social media and the news. I am 24/7 on the news back home. So I get some information that you guys don't get here. And I'm not a consumer of the American news, so I'm missing that part from that perspective. So forgive me for that side. But there is a small minority in Israel that is divisive against what's going on. The majority of people, even the young people nowadays, especially after October 7th, have rallied in favor of Israel. And they realize not only with what happened during October 7th, but also what is going on outside in the social media that they themselves experience. They have realized that everything that we were told as kids there's some truth to it. And to be honest, when I grew up and my parents talked about, oh, you gotta be careful, you're Jewish, you're going out there, like anti-Semitism, it's real stuff. I thought you guys are wrong. Me personally thought that. Not only that, I still think this. I think peace is the solution. I think violence creates violence. But I now, unfortunately, recognizing more and more that anti-Semitism is an actual beast that is growing and growing and never stopped. and part of the challenge. Now, from a perspective in Israel, it varies and changes mostly the more the time goes by with this war, from the perspective of the families of the hostages. They will receive a lot of comments from the prime minister, from the government, things like that. When times go by, their patience is reduced and minimized more and more and more. And I don't blame them. They're frustrated. But even inside that community of hostages and fallen soldiers and daughters and sons, there's even in them, there are divisions. There's one that will advocate, let's go in and fight, because that's the only way. And there's the one that will ask for stop the entire thing and let's get our people back at any cost. I am not in a position to sit in front in their with their hats and say what I think it's, because I'm not in their shoes. I have no idea. But it is there. There are protests in Israel in major cities that are against the war from Jewish people who advocate for peace with Palestinians. It happened in Haifa last week. And one clip that I saw on social media, one lady who is she's Israeli, wants the war to continue or to end, like from our perspective, military. She went there and she tried to stop a convention of Israelis and Palestinians that were in Haifa that advocated for peace, because she had families there of people who lost sons from both, or kids from both sides of the coin, Palestinians and Israelis, that came together to have a peace rally or a demonstration in Haifa. For her, or that person who took that video, that was hard. She was like, I'm going to stop you guys from doing this because you are inside my country advocating for something while our sons and daughters are in the military right now fighting. So it's there. It's there from all around. Not as big as around the world, obviously, number-wise, but it's there as well.
So, and I would like to open this up to questions really in a couple of minutes, but I wonder, Richard, if you could tell us what division do you see as the most challenging for American Jews? Is it between us and our children? Is it between us and our government? Do we have divisions even with our Israeli brothers and sisters? Because I know there are many people who just blame everything on the current Israeli government. And I guess it doesn't matter, they all exist. Is it us versus the whole world? Most importantly, what do we do about some of these hardenings of positions?
Yeah, I think the biggest division we face is between us and knowledge. What I find is so many Jews who are overwrought by what they see as this constant bombardment of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, both from within the Jewish community and from other sources. They have very little idea about the substance of the issues and how to really, A, think about the issues for themselves, and B, how to converse about those issues, which is to suggest it's not to minimize the practical divisions that you just outlined. It is to suggest that I believe too many Jews, while they care deeply about Israel in their hearts, are limited by an inability to converse about the issues. And again, you don't have to have a PhD in Middle East history or Zionist history, but who are flummoxed by just the fundamentals of the argument. And then the problem becomes these very people inadvertently compound the problem because too many people who care have limited ability to really discuss the issues thoughtfully and intelligently. And I don't say that in any condescending way. I say it just based on observation, because I've had a friend, a Christian friend, say to me, now he's very pro-Israel. So the anecdote isn't 100% fair to this context. But he said to me, he said, Richard, he said, you know, there's such a swarm that comes at us around these issues every single day. He said he has found that the most effective way to communicate with people is when a Jewish person they know can talk to them about these issues. And what frustrates me, so look, we here in Birmingham, Alabama, you here in Dayton, Ohio, by and large, you're not going to go to Israel. You're not going to go fight in Gaza. You're not going to make Aliyah in the next 2 weeks. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? What can we do? We're not powerless. There's a sandstorm that's come at us, but we're not powerless. And one of the things I continually suggest to people is think about your circles of influence. Now, in a very broad sense, Dayton, Ohio, and Birmingham, Alabama are similar in a broad sense. We are each small Jewish communities in the heartland, and we have a certain amount of access and leverage and influence in the communities in which we live. So what I constantly say to people is use that access, leverage, and influence to reach out to those circles and groups and environments where you have connections, and either create conversations yourself or invite people like Ehud to come into those conversations to help people understand. And both within the Jewish community, where we're trying to navigate some of this tension and fractiousness, and between the Jewish community and the broader community. So at the risk of invoking a cliche, I think for American Jews, I'm not minimizing the excruciating challenge the IDF has in fighting Hamas. But we're not going over there, and they don't want us. They don't want me helping them in those tunnels, okay? But what we can do is fight our battle over here more aggressively, more strategically, more creatively, and more knowledgeably. And that can make a difference. As that fella said to me, it's when they hear from someone they know. He said, that's worth 1,000 social media posts. And we just need to do more of that and do better at that. So that's how I see it.
Great. Did I turn it off? I want up. I'm not here for the technology. I wonder if people would have questions. We have people online, and I wonder if those of you who are online, if you would cue our tech table over there, they can get some questions typed in the chat. or they can unmute you, but I would love people to come. We don't want to single you out and scare you, but we put a microphone up here so that Richard can see you as well as you ask questions. And I know if you don't, I have 100, maybe 1,000. But I have already talked to a lot of you who have passionate feelings and really have your own tough questions. So if you don't mind, I'd like to open it up at this moment and let you talk to these experts.
By the way, just a caveat of this, I myself have not experienced anti-Semitism here. Not on my social media accounts, not personally. I might be scary to some people because the way I present myself, teaching self-defense from Israel, it's a little bit scary to people. Yeah, I have a good friend of mine from Puerto Rican American, that always, every time we went to Wright State and he introduced people to me, he said, "This is my friend from the Mossad." I was like, stop, please. I don't need a, even though I personally think I don't want to be famous, I want to be infamous. That's me personally, but please, I will not hurt anybody. So questions are welcomed.
Unless provoked.
So Arlene will need a mic brought to her, but we, in the meantime, have Joel and, but great.
I was just wondering what happened to the questions that we put in with our RSVP. It asked if you have any questions. I mean, do you have them?
Oh, that probably meant time, place. I didn't get those. I'm so
If-
sorry, but if you have them, then we can carry a mic to you if you're not able to get to the mic. But let's start with Jeff Bloomer, who probably everyone in the room knows, or maybe most people in the room know, and Richard has just met, is our newer JCRC director, who really will take this endeavor right out of my hands, I hope, and hopefully will move this into a larger communal conversation.
That is the plan. Nice to meet you, and I know we'll be working together more community-wide. I'm just wondering about the education elements. I felt the same way as soon as these things happened, and there were some conversations both intergenerationally and with colleagues and whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish. There is a lack of knowledge about Israel and some of the nuances. Do you have suggestions on how folks in our community can educate themselves in order to be able to have intelligent conversations? And a comment that I have, that's the question. The comment is, I feel like the problem that you're describing is the problem of our times, is that we're not having intelligent conversations with each other in general, and social media is impacting that, and the news media is impacting that. And so I think right now it's close to our heart, but really this conversations without knowledge and without listening to one another is a big challenge.
Are you going first, Richard, or I?
So that louder than-
Can you hear us, Richard?
I'm sorry,
Will you go first or will I go first?
sir. You want me to go ahead and answer? Or
Yeah.
why don't you answer first and then I'll add to it?
Okay, from my perspective, I think you are right about not having intelligent conversation necessarily abroad. But what I experience, especially on social media, there's a lot of people, especially everybody here heard about TikTok. There's a lot of individuals now on TikTok that are doing lives or doing discussions about the current situation. A lot of the pro-Israelis are bringing in that aspect, conversations that are based on facts and intellectual, and they're trying to stay much about the topic all the time. The problem is when people are coming, and this is where I gave the answer in the past and before, and also that's what I see, people are still interjecting their emotions into the conversation. And here's the problem with that, but also the reality of it. You cannot stop people from having emotions and feelings. So having an intellectual conversation about it is, from my perspective, frugal. It means nothing because you don't have the same level of agreements between the two parties. It's lacking substantially in gap. So how do you approach that? In some way, you do need to have an intellectual conversation, but in addition, you need to bring your passion into it. How devoted or how much you feel about it without being disrespectful, which is difficult. Without saying, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and that's the way it is. Which, unfortunately, that's most of the conversations that I hear all the time. Well, this is the fact. Well, great. But I know a friend of mine who did this, or a friend of mine who happened this. And how do you deal with that all the time? So it's great to have that kind of conversation. It's important.
So,
I also, and I'll finish with this thought, I also think what we are lacking, and it's not our fault, we bring in a lot of information from our perspective. We're always, if you open an atlas book in every country, it's introspected from where you are from. So we don't have the information from the other side completely all the time. And also sometimes it's not there. It's not there. A lot of people are talking about, for example, about the Nakba. Anybody heard the term of the Nakba? Yes. The Nakba basically means not uprising, disturbance or fighting and things like that. That's what the Arabs call what happened in 48 in Israel. It's called the Day of the Nakba, when they fought against Israel. They got displaced and all that stuff. You don't hear the stories of the Palestinians, what happened to them. I know some information from what I hear from our side, what their leaders told them, what everything like that. I don't know private conversations of Palestinians who've been through that. So I always come from a perspective, I'm giving my opinion about what I know, but I understand that I have no control or I don't have the full image, 100% truth and facts of everything. I will never have that. So I have to always start, me personally, I always start from that perspective, that I don't have all the truth all the time, but I have my truth and I will try to work together to see if we can talk about it.
so let me pick up on that. Now, I'm not suggesting this is easy. I've been at this work for a long time. There's others who may do it better, but I haven't come to it just in the last 6 months. I think number one, and this is a principle I've always tried to adhere to, speak to people in the language in which they are speaking to you. Okay? Meaning, if they're speaking to you in an emotional context, then speak to them, not in a overwrought context, but an emotional context. For example, one of the things that I have found most effective is when somebody says something that is just flatly untrue. For example, Israel discriminates against Arabs. They have absolutely no rights, and it's an apartheid society. What I say is, well, gosh, I said, that hasn't been my experience. And let me just share with you two things for you to think about. I said, number one, a number of years ago, we had an Israeli consul general for the Southeast stationed in Atlanta who was an Israeli Arab. And that helped me understand that Israeli Arabs have opportunities and they serve in the diplomatic corps. I said another time, I think this was one of my first trips to Israel, I went to Hadassah Hospital. And in the courtyard were Arab families waiting to be called to be treated just like the Jewish families. And I could give you more examples, but this is what I've observed. And I said, as you continue to think about this, I see how much you care. I'd like you to think about what I'm sharing with you, because it might give you some additional perspective. Now, those anecdotes are true, but that's totally emotional, okay? I didn't talk to them about 1948. I didn't talk to them about the partition. I didn't talk to them about the 5 times the Palestinian leadership has said no to Israel's attempt to reach a territorial compromise. I didn't do any of that. I talked to them in the language in which they were speaking to me. Now, conversely, if they're saying, well, help me understand the history, isn't it true that in 1947, 1967, 19 whatever, then you answer that in a different context. So that's one thing. Another thing that I never do, I never send people links to articles, okay? That you really need to read this. I never do that because A, that suggests I don't know the answer to their question. So therefore it further validates their question, and they can find their own links and send them back to you, and it becomes basically purposeless. The opportunity, you see, the challenge with social media is nobody speaks to each other directly. The opportunity in one-on-one and small group settings is that people do speak to you directly, and you have the chance to respond directly. And it's an entire different level of communication and a much more lasting level of communication. Finally, I just want to share a piece of information that some of you may be aware of. I know how frustrated and freaked out we are by what we've seen on the college campuses, and in particular, how it sticks in our craw when it emanates from the anti-Zionist Jewish groups, and even more so when we have members of those groups in our extended families or immediate families. Very, very frustrating. But a poll just came out, a respected poll, that asked college students to rank, they gave them 9 issues to rank them in importance. And the Israeli-Palestinian situation, the Israeli-Hamas situation ranked last. It ranked last, which suggests to me these encampments were just theater, spring theater on the quad, which further suggests to me that what we fear may have very little lastingness, but what it does is it creates opportunities, if you can find them and you pursue them, to now have conversations that in the right way and the right tone can lead to education. So those are some of my thoughts about this. And I just want to add parenthetically, I will be happy if you think it's of value by the time we conclude this discussion. Doing this in Alabama, I've done it for others elsewhere, to do small group Zooms for any group you want to gather, to just do Q&A, to have these kinds of conversations. I have the time, the motivation, and the availability. And it's not that I'm the only one, but I'm the one at the moment who's offering. And again, it just affirms my belief. There's no substitute, hands down, none, for both building and communicating through personal relationships. And lastly, and I'll stop here, not only is that the best way, I think, that we as American Jews and others who care about Israel can fight the fight that we're engaged in, when you can connect with people of influence, people who are in government, people who are business leaders, people who have access to large cadres of people those are the best opportunities. I did a Zoom the other night, a 2-hour Zoom with a retired chief of staff for a very influential congressman who now has his own lobbying business and is very well connected in DC, who, to my surprise, knew very little about the conflict. Here's a man who had an extremely influential position in Congress, but he reached out to me through a mutual friend wanting to learn about it. And it was a fantastic opportunity because he has circles of influence. And we can't win the social media battle because it plays to our weakness. Number one, we don't have the numbers. We just don't have the numbers. There's so few of us and so much more of them. And to understand Israel, it's complex and nuanced at times, and that's not suited to social media. But what we can do, again, is to deploy and access our circles of influence and the circles of influence of others, which can have a tremendous impact, tremendous. The American Jewish community, the Ohio Jewish community, the Dayton Jewish community, the Birmingham Jewish community, we're extraordinarily well organized. And we might see, the fissures internally sometimes, but externally we're seen as a very effective, powerful, organized, politically active, financially successful, highly educated community. And that's our opportunity to converse with those who are going to chart the course of our communities and our country. And so there's lots of opportunities out there.
If you want it, we have a question.
Okay, if you can explain how, like,
We have a question.
explain to other people that people don't understand and give the information. But one thing we haven't discussed is, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. The Hamas want to destroy Israel or push the Jews to the sea and kill them all. And they're living among regular people and they're hiding and they're using the regular citizens as hostages. And in order to wipe them out, we've had influence had to destroy all kinds of civilians. Like my understanding is things like 30,000, half of which are children, and then a lot of the Palestinians are starving. And when we tried to give aid, like maybe they fought against each other or fought against the 8 trucks. And another thing was maybe this was just one bad thing, that there was a non-governmental agency that was providing aid, I guess, to the Palestinians, like a Red Cross truck or something. And I guess before Israel went in to bomb that area, they were supposedly warned about that non-governmental truck, but they still destroyed it and killed innocent people who were trying to help the Palestinians. And now I guess sometimes Israel will tell Palestinians like to go north or go here or go there, but then I think they end up bombing the areas that they tell the areas to escape to. And now there's an area that, as far as I know, the Israeli government or the leaders, they want to bomb and destroy that because there's still more Hamas there. But now our government, our president, even though Congress has authorized bombs and stuff like that, always sending us like rifles and shells. He doesn't want more bombings. And maybe this is part of the reason that there's so much anti-Israel, because the Palestinians are like refugees, and it's probably partly because the Arabs won't let go to their countries, like Egypt won't let them escape to Egypt. But I mean, maybe it's not time to ask your opinion. What do you think about bombing that northern area and maybe killing 30,000 more innocent civilians that were killed more.
Yeah.
Hamas.
I was trying to.
Create the question for
Yeah,
us.
throughout the information that I think most of us know or heard of information. Heard about the situation of the humanitarian aid group that led by, what's his famous chef, Rodriguez, Andres, yeah. And 7 of his people got killed by that. What I see nowadays, and I think that's also one of the problem, besides the information out there, especially with social media, and we're going back and forth and coming back again to social media, because unfortunately that's so prevalent nowadays in our lives, that's where the engine to all information now goes. Outside of the news channels, I think they are actually a small piece of our information nowadays. But what I see a lot is the lack of knowledge of people about how war is dealt or being done, how procedures are happening inside a war. I see a lot of information coming out there from people who are going, well, you killed this, you did this, that they, in my opinion, think that we are in a computer game, that's how it's being done. Sorry, I'm being vocal in many places. That it seems like for them that everything is black and white, like a computer. If you're fighting against a group, this is how you did it. That's how it's done because of you saw on a movie or in a TV show, and they don't understand the complexity of the situation of a war, of how you fight, especially in the surroundings that is right now the Gaza Strip. Israel now is fighting in a situation that is not even similar to what happened in Vietnam, to what happened in any wars around the globe in the past, I don't know, 60, 100 years. It's a completely different situation. And a lot of times, if you haven't heard of it, there's actually military units from different countries in the world, including the United States, that are actually arriving to Israel to study what they're doing in the Gaza Strip, because I think the information coming out that the combative to civilian ratio is 1-to-1 or even less. From that perspective, if you take numbers the way they are. So I think the most problem is people seeing it as black and white, and what they hear as a piece, that's what it is. And they don't understand the complexity of the situation. The complexity, there's a term called fog of war. Meaning that is so hard to understand, even though when you get information from your superiors and everything like that from the information, when you are in that situation, sometimes you make bad decisions. Sometimes you make mistakes. Not justifying that, but that will happen. And as unfortunate as it is, that what happened, for example, with the aid group from the civilian aid group, there was some mistakes there that are being investigated. I don't have all the information to know exactly what happened. What I do know from my perspective, and I've been to the military, we were never told, regardless of the objective, if you see a civilian, shoot and kill him. If he's not, I'm sorry?
The opposite, right?
The opposite.
Trained.
We are trained to save their lives. We are told, a lot of times we hear the numbers, oh, children are being killed, or women are being killed, men are being killed, civilians are, just the term, civilians are being killed, right? You do not hear if that civilian had a firearm in his possession, had lifted a knife, had a strapped of a bomb to it. You don't hear that information. I don't hear that information. I don't know. What I do know that IDF soldiers will not shoot at an unarmed civilian with a weapon, with a bomb, whatever. Here's a small example. Again, it's all information that we see. There was the incident that you mentioned that the Israelis told somebody, the Gazans, to go to north. there was an aid area there that they were supplying. And the IDF bombed a structure there or a tent that had aid in it because, and they said we killed innocent Palestinians, right? But at the same information, the same video that came out, it shows a rocket being shot from a few meters away from that tent or aid place. So there was some terrorist group, individuals, I don't know if it's Hamas, I don't know if it's Jihad, that fired from a place that was very close to innocent Palestinian. So the question is always going to be, what do you expect Israel to do? What the same thing as what do you expect the US to do, or any country that is fighting terrorism? The answer from my perspective, well, you try to save as many as you can, but you still need to engage and control the situation, so not more of those incidents happen. But again, every question here is being have so many facets to the questions that we are bringing now, that have so many parts to it, that each part will take us hour to just answer each part individually. And that's the problem with intelligent conversation. If you want to stop on one thing, you're going to stay there for a long time, but it's always going to be routed to all more and more.
Okay.
That's. Do you want to answer that or?
Thank you. First off, we have to get the hostages home. That's something that in your thought of war seems to be forgotten. But I know that the Israeli people have that as a major priority. The other thing is that we need to get rid of not only Hamas, but all terrorist groups, because they're a danger not only to us here, but all over the world. But getting further along, back in the days of Vietnam, I wasn't against America. I love America. I can't say the same for President Johnson. And I think that was part of the problem, is the government wasn't listening. In this case, today, moving very fast forward, prior to October 7th, the Israeli people were demonstrating against Netanyahu. And there was a reason for that. And now we have to be for him because he's the leader of Israel. I'm not anti-Semitic when I say that I pray for peace, and I include peace in the Palestinians. Not Hamas, not Jihad, not ISIS, but Palestinian people who want to just live. Thank you.
Richard, you want to take that?
My challenge is I'm not hearing the question. So if Judy wants to synopsize the question, sure. But if not, you're there, and that sounds as if there are a lot of.
I was going to make Ehud come up with a question out of it. It just was a brilliant statement about the desire for peace. We all want peace. We also all want an end to terrorism. So how do we hold those two truths and act, both as Israel and both as American Jews? Oh, take that one, Richard.
Sure. Look, I heard something not too long ago from a very intelligent commentator. And he said, Israel faces a predicament that no other country faces. And that is, it needs to be loved in the West and feared in the Middle East. And it's a very, very complicated equation, because oftentimes to do what you need to do or being asked to do by the West reflects itself within Middle East culture and Middle East language as either indecisiveness or weakness. Conversely, when you have to respond and play by Middle East rules, if you're going to survive as a Jewish country in the Middle East, some of it, unfortunately, has to be fairly harsh. And that doesn't play so well in the West. And this is Israel's, since its very founding, its continuing predicament. And what I suggest to people is, do you love your family? And of course, everybody says, yes. I said, are you supportive of your family? Your kids, your children, your siblings, when they're going through very difficult challenges and striving to navigate dilemmas? Do you carpet them? Do you editorialize about what you think they should do and what they shouldn't do? Well, I suspect not. For me, the analogy holds. If you care about Israel, then we are family. And I think that those of us who live comfortably and securely in places like Dayton, Ohio, and Birmingham, Alabama, where we have no consequential security anxieties, and quite possibly have never had, for us to even try to make judgments about what Israel should or shouldn't do, that's problematic. I think that we ought to respect the right of Israelis to make their own judgments about their own country and their own society, because they are in such a vastly different situation than we are. And to circle back what I said at the beginning, in a predicament that no other country is in or has ever been in. They have to be loved by the West and feared in the Middle East. And the last piece, and I'll defer to Ehud to validate this if he's inclined. If you ask Israelis today, if you have to choose between being loved in the West or feared in the Middle East, I've yet to meet the Israeli who wouldn't pick the latter. They said, we want to be feared in the Middle East. And therein lies a lot of the predicaments, the static, the challenges, and the complexity of our role as being ambassadors for the Jewish state and being allies of the Jewish state. And it slides back to what I said, and gosh knows, I don't mean to say this in any kind of patronizing or condescending way. I don't mean it at all. But I think these are times that really challenge our thinking ability and call upon us to go deeper and just really think through some of these unique aspects that I'm mentioning and not gravitate toward judgment simply based on news coverage or what happened 2 days ago or a reflexive position. And I'm not saying the truth is I didn't hear any of those questions. So, but you know, people who raise these questions, they're not ill thought out. what I think they are is not going deep enough to really understand A, what's at stake here, but B, the complexity of Israel's challenges. And I'll say one other thing as an illustration. People ask me all the time, well, what about Netanyahu? Don't you think he's the problem? Don't you think Netanyahu has to go? Wouldn't Israel be better without Netanyahu? And I say to them, I said, look, I said, Israel's a democracy. And if we proudly proclaim it's a democracy, we have to respect the right of the Israeli people to choose their own leaders. Okay? They have a very robust, vibrant, alive democratic system. They have mechanisms for bringing down a government if they're discontented. And I said, I think our job is to try to understand the rationale and the motivation and the choices that Israel makes and explain them in a way that will deepen the understanding of others. So I've Jewish Federation director for 37 years. I retired about 5 years ago. So in my 42 years of doing this, I have never commented, nor will I ever comment on what an Israeli prime minister should or shouldn't do. Number one, because I don't live there, and it's not my son in Gaza as we speak. And number two, again, we proudly proclaim Israel's a democracy. So we ought to respect the right of Israelis to choose their own leaders through their own democratic system. And sometimes we know in our country, those choices are not so great. So it's for the Israelis to determine when the choices are not so great, and they have mechanisms to change the government. So that's trying to package all these things that we're talking about together with at least my framework as how I think about it as an American Jew.
I will give one sentence to caveat on that. And I want to apologize in advance. My time is limited today because of my personal engagement. And then I'll give Martin in a second. But I will apologize if I will leave. But I want to keep it open. If anybody would like to have a conversation once I'm not here, I'm open to phone calls, get together, a cup of coffee. Judy knows you feed me, I'm good. I'm good. Or email or social media.
And if you give them liquor, you won't believe the access.
But just to add to what Richard said, if we're talking about current reality, I agree with him about the same statement of we want to be loved in the West, feared in the Middle East. Just because that's the game. And by the way, politics is muddled everything. Politics is always in between everything. So that's to disconnect them from politics, it's hard. But if I'll give you my own truth, I think Israel should be loved in the West, but also should be loved in the Middle East. And one of the prime examples to that is the Abraham Accords. Not from a perspective of politics or anything like that, just because it opened up and you see Israel is going to Dubai, Israel is being loved, or hear sentiments from the Middle East countries that are not fighting with us, that they are okay with us, that they enjoy having us coming over and having relationship from that perspective.
Yeah, that's
one thing, but please.
Let me add to that. That's a great augmentation. Yes, because one of the things we haven't mentioned, and I say this to people all the time, I said to me, one of the most significant things since October 7th is while we hear all this blowback from the Western states and the Western governments and condemnations of Israel, not a single Arab state has broken diplomatic relations with Israel. And that's really, really significant. And there's conversations go on about normalization with Saudi Arabia. And about a month and a half ago, I read a report about possible normalization talks with Indonesia, which is the world's largest Muslim country. So I didn't catch every word that Ehud just said because a little bit of static, but interpreting what I think you said is, yes, loved in the West, but also welcomed by new partners in the Middle East. And part of it is, and I think you would agree, they're not doing it because they have fallen in love with Zionism. They're doing it because they respect Israel's power, Israel's economic capabilities, and all that Israel can offer them. So most definitely, I'm really glad you brought that up because to me, that is so significant that no single Arab country with which Israel has diplomatic relations has broken diplomatic relations.
Don't give me the example of Turkey, because Turkey is a problem by itself for a long time.
Turkey's a different kettle of fish, but I'm talking about the Abraham Accords, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, etc.
We
We have a
have
question over here.
another question.
She said this is on, it's on.
Yes.
I want to talk about the kids on college campuses, because they're bombarded by really horrible pictures of people being massacred in great numbers. And they're not getting both sides of the equation. How do we speak with them? I mean, they're very impassioned, you know, they're young people. And they think, well, I'm not gonna go into, I'd like to hear your points.
I'll take that for a moment for.
And what do we do with the kids on campus who are so impassioned with with the information they have? But Ehud first, then you.
One thing that I think the majority of what we see right now, and Richard have said it before, of the encampments on the campuses, are very have little influence of what's going on. Also, some of the information that's coming out is that they are being orchestrated to be there by some influence. I'm not saying it's true or not. I'm saying that's the information that is coming out as well. My also personal opinion, I think that some of the youth nowadays, especially with what happened with COVID time and everything, they're feeling that they are lacking control of their lives. And this is an opportunity for them to show what you guys, not me, what you guys have done in the past, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, in the revolution, in those times when you guys protested. It's for the young ones here, I apologize. But I think that they are trying to compare themselves to their parents and grandparents in that perspective, and to show that they also can take a role in their life and take control. Some of them, not all of them, and fight like that, to be heard like that. Because I think a lot of them are not being heard in a way that they want to be heard. Now, how do you deal with them? One of them, I think, is policies from the universities need to be clear and on the same path. If there's a policy from the university that says one thing, but they allow another thing, then there's a problem there. But if the policies are not clear and the president is not giving direct orders to what can be done or not be done, then they will continue. I don't see, though, from my perspective, I don't see the other side of the pro-Israelis having the same battle, you can say, rap battle, whatever you want, against those incumbents. Just because I don't see any tents from the pro-Israelis being built up in front of them and being one against each other. I don't see that happen. One, because the numbers, sheer numbers. Two, I think it also financially, they're being backed up. And that's part of the information that's coming out from some organizations. There's a lot of money there. I mean, there's information here. And again, that's hearsay. Some people say that they're being paid a stipend to be there. I don't know. But that's information that's coming out there. I mean, again, I don't think it's a big deal. It's enraging from my perspective to hear that. It's not fun, but I don't think it's such a big deal. Currently, it might develop to something worse, but currently.
Well, before Richard goes, there are people projecting that the DNC in Chicago is going to be another summer of love, so to speak. So do we do anything about the campus protests? And if so, what could we do? Or do we just ignore it as, you know, as something that will move on?
Let me respond.
Sure, yes.
So I think, and I'll explain why. It's really important that we not overreact, but it's equally important that we not underreact. And I think that we need to take an unvarnished look at what happened over these last 60 to 90 days. The stories are coming out that a significant number, I think Ehud just said this, are fomented by people from the outside. Obviously, there's orchestrated funding for these villages to spring up overnight with all these tents, relatively expensive tents that all look alike, with food and supplies and bottled water and all of that. It's for some of these students, it's that cause to give them a sense of purpose. Particularly, I concur after the whole COVID college experience. It's fun. Remember being young and being out on the quad spring, and it's very heady that you're doing something. And I think there's some silver linings in what took place in the colleges. Number one, it wasn't all colleges. I think there are 4,000 colleges in America. It might have been 75, okay? Wasn't all colleges. Number two, in another survey I read of college students, there was overwhelming disapproval of the encampments and the demonstrations and the intimidation of Jewish students and denying students the right to pursue their academic activities. I also think it awakened Jews. For those for whom Israel still has been a distant conversation, they're interested, but they're not attuned to it certainly the way that we're not. It awakened them. It brought this beast home into their laps, and it forced them to now have to really think seriously about the anti-Zionism, about anti-Israel, anti-Semitic fervor at these schools, which in many cases were their schools, where they went to school, where their kids went to school, where they've given oodles of money to. It was a tremendous, in my mind, very healthy, in a very kind of silver lining way, gut check, reality check. And the additional piece, and I have seen this in going out and speaking to non-Jewish groups, it's awakened their interest in a new way because they have come to see quite correctly, and I articulate this, that this is no longer an Israel issue and a Jewish issue. It's an attack on American values, American free speech, the academic culture that has made America great over its history. And I give them examples of how this has profound implications for them as Americans, and people start to get that. I also think there are things we can do. So we do know that Jewish alumni, Jewish donors have written these schools that they're so discomforted with. I wish more did it. But also, I think, and you can see this starting to just bubble up, I think we need to develop a culture where and I think those of us in positions of influence who have pulpits, literally and figuratively, who are respected as opinion leaders, need to tell parents, if you're worried about anti-Semitism on campus, then pick other schools, okay? Pick other schools. I heard a wonderful interview with Bret Stephens. Most of you know who he is. He was a former editor of the Jerusalem Post, a New York Times foreign affairs columnist, a very distinguished journalist. And he said, he thinks American Jews are addicted to prestige schools. And he said, it will be interesting to see if we continue to swallow the environment and what's come out of these so-called elite schools. And then he said to the interviewer, he said, did you hear about the demonstrations at the University of Nebraska? And the interviewer said, no, I didn't. What happened? He said, that's the point. Nothing happened. He said, you can get a really good education at the University of Nebraska. You can get a really good education at the University of Alabama. And I think Jews, we can't win the social media war. We can be players in the power and influence and change agent war. And then lastly, I hope a movement springs up where high school guidance counselors are asked continually by Jewish parents about what is the level of anti-Semitism at these schools you're suggesting for my child. Now, the counselors won't know, but Hillel certainly and other sources can help educate these guidance counselors and turn it into a movement. We're not victims. We're a powerful community who, when we act creatively and strategically, we can do so much and create so much change. And the same metaphor extends to the whole conversation. October 7th was horrible. Quite obviously, we all know worst, greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. But the difference is, since October 7th, there haven't been more massacres like that. We have a country, we have an army, we have a peoplehood, and we do have the capability, both in Israel and I believe in America, to chart our own destiny. And whether we seize that opportunity here, I think will be how we are remembered for this point in history as Jews and as Americans. So my takeaway with the college kids, don't overreact, but don't underreact.
I want to take this moment because I'm actually leaving. I want to open something for Richard from my perspective, and I'll be a little bit selfish right now and be a little bit emotional. But I think that's also a question that some of you might have or heard. From an Israeli perspective here in the United States, in Dayton, Ohio, which is a small city, October 7th was horrific. From a perspective of what I experienced from my friends from the Arab world, I received no condolences. I received any inquiry about my own family and friends, regardless if they were part of it or not. And that's something that's really, really hurt a lot. From an Israeli, where throughout the time when conflicts happened in Israel, I was always opening my arms to my Palestinian friends, Arab friends, whoever they are from Lebanon, whatever, and asking about their families and their loved ones if they're okay. I received nothing to this day from no one. I don't need them to condemn. I did not receive anything like, how are you doing? How is your family and friends? Your loved ones? Received nothing. And that's something that is hard to swallow. When you talk highly about peace and about coexistence, and you want that, but in the same breath, you do not come and express your sentiments towards somebody you care about or you consider a friend. So that's something that is, I think if you meet other Israelis here or around, ask them if they were approached by their friends in the community from that side and being asked how they're doing. I can guarantee that majority, I can't say 100%, but majority did not.
Let me,
So I'll leave it to Richard to answer if you want, if you guys want to continue that question, open it up.
yeah, I want to pick up on this.
You guys.
Thank you for saying that, because that touches something within me as well. It's the same thought process. I think it's a silver lining that we now have a deeper and much more realistic understanding of who our allies are, who they are not, and that all of this time and energy, and I was a Federation director for a long time, that we've invested in these initiatives to create coalitions and partnerships, et cetera. In Birmingham, we've deployed huge amounts of time and energy in the arena of Black-Jewish relations, which always seems to be Jewish initiated, that it's been virtually silent since October 7th. Additionally, one of the things that I have had to reconcile with, and it's a challenge, but I've worked it through, and I'll tell you how I manage it. We live in a very Christian evangelical area, Alabama. And the Christian evangelical community, by and large, is very supportive of Israel. And the initial outpouring of support was great. We get all these wonderful and affirming messages. And then as time went on, the messages, for the most part, would just kind of drift off. And then when I would get one saying, I was thinking about you, my heart breaks for Israel, I began by responding with the following. I said, your kind words mean so much to me, and I'm grateful that our friendship endures. Here's how you can help. And I very explicitly ask them to reach out to their contacts, their church groups, their business clubs, their civic organizations, their circles of influence, to arrange for me or someone else in our community to come and speak and educate. And I would say 3/4 to 4/5 of the people to whom I've reached out like that haven't even responded. Okay? So that's a little, that's a jolt, it's a wake-up call. But what's also hugely rewarding is that other 15 to 20% who respond and say, you know, let me get back to you on this. And 2 or 3 days later, you hear, look, I'm going to put you in touch with my brother-in-law, who's the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Look, I want you to come back to our church a week from Sunday to speak again, to update our Sunday school group. And that's been amazing. But you realize that those who you think were your allies, very few exceptions, when push comes to shove, they aren't. Okay? And those whom you might not have thought as your partners, within them, particularly the Christian evangelical community, it's a great reservoir of support and some people willing to act. My closest friends today, there are 3 or 4. We talk constantly. They look for opportunities. They're out there. They're posting. They're speaking. Are friends I've made since October 7th. So it's I don't know whether it's what do they call in the economy or the stock market, a correction. I don't know whether it's a reality check, but it's true, which then I'll say this last thing. I've had a belief for 20 years, and this, since October 7th, it's become even more, I think it's become validated and confirmed. It's a harsh thing I'm going to say, but for a long time, I've believed that Israel only has 4 allies. Those allies are steadfast and can be influential. So who are the 4 allies? Mainstream Jews. Jews who care deeply about Israel, who are Zionists, mainstream Jews. Number 2, most, we call them evangelical Christians. I call them biblically inspired Christians, for whom the land of Israel and the people of Israel are critically important to them in terms of their faith journey. Number 3, political conservatives, who often overlap with evangelical Christians. And number 4, the majority, the bulk of the US Congress. I think that those are Israel's 4 enduring allies. And beyond that, the others, I think, will come and go. And when they come, we need to say, this is wonderful. We're proud. We're partners. This is great. And when they go, we should have anticipated it and continue to anticipate it. And oddly, I'll stop here. There may be a 5th ally, which circles back to something we were talking about a little while ago. And that is those moderate Arab states who recognize that Iran is the threat in the Middle East, is the threat to them and their well-being. And they may not be rip-roaring Zionists, but they understand that they can be more successful and more secure through an alliance with Israel. Because the other thing that struck me, again, through it all since October 7th, the thousands of stories we've all read, the scores of podcasts, news reports, I think the 2 most important things, one I mentioned, that since October 7th, not a single Arab country has broken diplomatic relations with Israel. And the second, when Iran attacked Israel, a month or so ago, that it was certainly tremendous assistance from the United States and Great Britain, but it also was extraordinary assistance from Jordan and under the radar from Saudi Arabia that enabled Israel to do what it did. And to me, those 2 things, the absence of a rupture in diplomatic relations and Saudi Arabia and Jordan aligning themselves with Israel to help the Israelis deflect the Iranian attack, to me, are the 2 most significant developments since October 7th.
American media, I periodically hear these very disturbing instances of West Bank settler violence. I do not hear a counter narrative from Israel. I wonder if such a narrative exists and it's being suppressed, or whether there is such a narrative in the Israeli media, but not in the American. That's my question. If I have food this year, I think you probably get a more complete answer.
Well, I don't know. Richard knows his stuff. I don't know if you heard it fully, Richard, about the West Bank violence and what is the narrative in Israel and the counter narrative, and then what about over here too?
Yeah. I appreciate you asked that. I actually listened to a podcast. And by the way, people often ask me, what do I find to be the best sources of information? So Judy alluded to my background in journalism. In addition to being a Federation director, I was a working journalist, a reporter and editor for a number of newspapers, including the Birmingham News, and I taught journalism. So I think a lot about that as well and bring a journalist's perspective to news sources. For me, there's only one news source I trust when it comes to Israel, and it's the only one I read, and that is Times of Israel. It is the best site with the best reporters. They're not hawking a political agenda, and it is up to date and comprehensive. Times of Israel. And the other is something I started to listening to very recently, which I have found the most in-depth, thought-provoking, nuanced source of information. It's a podcast. Some of you may know it. You'll know his name, Dan Senor, Senor. He's got a fantastic podcast called Call Me Back. That's the name of it. And that's really the only two things that I rely on for information these days. So it so happened, first thing I do when I get up in the morning, I also listen. The Times of Israel also has a daily podcast. It's about 20 minutes. It takes you behind the stories of the day. And the story today, one of the stories highlighted dealt with the settler violence, West Bank settler violence. And, you know, the reality, and this is very important, I don't think we should ever, and I don't think the questioner is suggesting this, I don't think we should ever sugarcoat, rationalize, or excuse those things in Israel that are just frankly unacceptable. And the settler violence, which is not widespread, it gains a lot of publicity, but it's not widespread. But the incidents themselves, nonetheless, are reprehensible. It seems they need to be policed more aggressively. It's a terrible black eye that it's a terrible thing that Israel's adversaries and even its friends use to blemish Israel. And it's a problem. And I don't think Israel, it's a great question. What's Israel's narrative about that? I don't think Israel really has a narrative about that because I think it's failed to respond as forthrightly and aggressively as it's needed to these instances, although they are not as frequent and widespread as media reports might suggest.
And I don't need to tell you that it is the tragedy of young people who have grown up in this atmosphere of violence and retribution and back and forth and hatred. And just as we understand and we say, well, of course, the so-called refugees have been raised with this as their background, we now have a generation of Israeli kids who have had this kind of battle. And it is to some degree, you can see where it comes from, even though we like to think Israel's better than that. But how can it be? These are a generation of kids who know their history. So we hear now from Felix, who can I just say he's a survivor, Richard. I don't know if you can see him in the camera. And here he goes.
Yes, I remember you used to say in Europe before the war that to be quiet, not to say anything. That refers to my question. I see you sitting and watching the news, repeated views of the massacres and injured people and destroyed and nothing else. It's sort of a propaganda war against Israel, against the Jewish people. They don't seem to care. When we have such power, as you indicated, is there any possibility for some pushback? For instance, to say, on the other hand, perhaps the pilot mistook something, or perhaps the information was wrong, or whatever. any kind of word to get the other side, if there is any possible. That is my question, because they always said they're not going to, we're not going to be silent anymore, but I hear nothing. And the regular news, I'm not talking about the social media, which is for the children, but old people like myself.
Judy, you're gonna have to frame that.
So, yes, so our sound is always at issue. So Felix is saying, and rightfully so, that the media, those of us who are not getting everything from TikTok, but are just reading and seeing the TV news, showing perpetual attacks of Israel on innocent civilians, and we're not doing enough, or are we doing enough, or how can we do more to discredit the media reports, which always 3 days later turn out that they came from, from a first launch. And so how, if you're saying we can't be silent, how can we do better and more, and what can we do to get the Israeli side out, the Jewish side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want to try and answer it in a couple of different ways. I think initially, in the 30 to 45 days after October 7th, the news coverage, particularly CNN, which was mainly what I watched at that time, of Israel, the attack, the trauma, the impact, the processing of it was extraordinary. If you remember Jake Tapper, Anderson Cooper, just doing these amazing interviews with people affected by October 7th. Then it began changing as Israel began responding. Now, part of that is, yeah, to a degree, that's the story. I'm speaking as a journalist now. But also, that made, I hate to phrase it, I wasn't a TV journalist, but we print journalists were constantly in environments with the TV journalists, and you could see how they worked and thought. In their words, that makes for good footage. Okay, that's what they want. They want good footage, good footage. So, the interviews, very emotional interviews and tours of the kibbutzim had, not to minimize any of it, had, quote, run their course. And now both the story and the footage shifted to these pictures of devastation and destruction. And there's another piece to this, which I want to try and explain. I remember the very first day of college. I went to American University in Washington, D.C., and I remember Journalism 101. I remember walking in, and we had a textbook, and it opened up, and the very first thing, there was actually a little drawing cartoon type thing. It was, what is news? And it's a story about an editor walking over to a young reporter, and he says, he's got the cigar and the rolled up sleeves, and he says, "Kid, let me explain news to you." And the young reporter looks up, and he says, "Look, when a dog bites a man, that's not news. But when a man bites a dog, that's news." The applicability here is, and this has been a pattern over the years, the inversion that Israel, the victim, is now the oppressor, that Israel, the country of Holocaust survivors, is now, quote, God forbid, it's not true, committing genocide, that Israel the Israelis, and this might not be said explicitly, but it's said on social media, are the new Nazis. It's the ultimate man bites dog story. It's a twisting, and the fact that the Jewish state, which in the minds of those inclined to be critical of it, which for so long has presented itself and purported itself to be a liberal, humane democracy with the highest code of ethics and the most moral army in the world, it's a great way to say it's not true. Look at what these people do. Okay. So it's more, man is biting the dog. And that's a dynamic. I could demonstrate it to you in coverage after coverage after coverage. And all of that's a challenge. So what I started to do is I stopped watching, not out of any protest, but because I saw how it had the potential to pollute your thought process and detach you from the reality of this situation. That's why I told you I only rely on one website, which I think is an objective website, very critical of Israel at times. But what I saw being lost from the conversation, knowing that I was going out and speaking to groups, I didn't want that seeping into my subconscious, was the whole reason this conflict started and how quickly it could end if Hamas released the hostages, laid down its arms, surrendered, and its leaders agreed to be deported. And that just got lost. And you feel, trying to think, y'all have tornadoes in southern, in the Dayton area. Okay, so we have tornadoes. And you get these, the weatherman, he's telling you it's coming, and you go to your safe place and all of that. It's just coming, it's coming, it's coming. Well, I felt we were in a tornado or a tsunami or a hurricane of shifting coverage of the essentials of this conflict, which if you continue to expose yourself to it, you don't get away from it and go to a hiding place, you're going to be influenced by it. So what can be done? I think it's a challenge. Now, Israelis have said this. This is a constant refrain from Americans and those who care deeply about Israel. They feel Israel could do a better job of presenting its case. Okay, better spokesman, better explanation, better this, better that. This Dan Senor podcast I mentioned called Call Me Back took a really deep dive into that. He went back and looked at what Thomas Friedman, this journalistic luminary with such influence who's constantly criticizing, castigating Israel. He went back and he looked at what he was writing in the late 1990s when Shimon Peres was prime minister, and it was almost verbatim to what he says about Netanyahu. Dan Senor looked at what Thomas Friedman and others were writing about Ehud Olmert, other Israeli. He said it's almost verbatim. And I remember, some of you will, that Menachem Begin, when Golda Meir died, I believe it was in the early, maybe mid to late 70s. Let me get my timeline right here. I was working on Capitol Hill or somewhere, that was in my experience. And people were talking about, well, the revered Israeli leader who could be difficult and intransigent, and they didn't use the word stiff-necked, but that was the implication. They said it about Rabin. They say it about every single Israeli prime minister. The difference is we now live in an age where instead of it being 100 voices saying these things, it's millions of voices. And it creates a skewed perception of reality that can lead, unless you're really careful and you work at it, as much as you care about Israel, you can be brainwashed. And if not literally, figuratively, and that's exactly what I saw starting to happen to me. It was like polluting my mind watching this CNN coverage of the good footage. All of a sudden, it was totally void of context. It was as if Hamas never attacked Israel. It's as if Israel woke up one day and said, let's go kill a bunch of people in the Gaza Strip and bomb buildings. It totally minimalized and marginalized the fact that Hamas plants themselves in civilian installations, plants themselves under civilian installations. It began in an even more perverse Alice in Wonderland twist to accept things Hamas was saying at face values and always use words when describing Israel's information that will lead you to doubt it, like, well, the IDF claimed, but it couldn't be independently verified. And you saw more and more of that. It's terrible. It's terrible. And it was mentioned to me that the gentleman who just asked the question, sir, that you're a survivor. So you remember well, you lived through that era leading up to the Holocaust, when reality just began to become inverted, and these illogical thoughts and behaviors began taking over the population. And there are a lot of similarities, but as I said 3 or 4 times in this call, we're not powerless. Okay, we have things we didn't have in the 1930s and 1940s. Most notably, a strong and wonderful country to which any Jew can flee at any time, a Jewish army, and an extraordinary network of powerful Jewish organizations in the free world, most notably the United States, that can advance the causes of our people and the state of Israel. And we can't lose sight of that, but we need to deploy all those things and understand the seriousness of the situation we're in.
I have a person I really just wanted to come and say hello. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I jump ahead?
No, that's okay.
Is that,
I can. Am I supposed to come up here?
you have to, you have to.
Oh, did you want to?
Cameron is one of a very clear thinking person who has been part of our community for 30. How old is Taryn?
Karen was the original Torah study
Baby,
baby, and
30 years?
He'll be 30 at the end of.
So for 30 years, Cameron, who is a sharer of many religions, what do I say, who dabbles in scholarly and knowledgeable.
Heritage in at least 3 faiths.
So he comes up with sometimes some good gadfly questions and difficult questions. I want to hear from Cameron.
I've been holding off saying anything because frankly, as an American, not Israeli, and also non-Jew, I haven't been real sure how much it was my place to say anything or have an opinion. And something I reflect on is that on October 7th, Israel lost not numerically as many, but as a percentage of its national population, way more people than the United States lost on 9/11. And yet nobody said to the United States, well, you know, America, it's been 6 months, it's been a year, shouldn't you be over this by now? You know, we prosecuted a war in Iraq for over 15 years and in Afghanistan for 20 years. And in response to losses on a single day, and I'm not here to say that we were wrong to respond to that, I do question how much we accomplished by it. I mean, I think 2 weeks after we left Afghanistan, the Taliban was back in charge, and what did we really change? I don't know. But in Iraq, I know we did one thing. We did a huge favor for Iran because Iraq and Iran had been regional opponents who held each other in check. And the United States went into Iraq for reasons that turned out to be utterly fraudulent, later on, who knew? But we completely removed Iraq as a functional opponent to Iran in the region, and as a result, Iran has become a regional superpower. Iran didn't create Hamas, but Hamas leaders have said, not since October 7th, but before, that for the last 10 years or so, Iran has funded about 70% of Hamas's operations. Same for Hezbollah, same for the Houthis, other things that begin with H, I don't know. But
Haman.
thank you. I'm sure that, yeah, I guess that as an American, I don't know how much standing I have to, look at Israel and point at Israel and say, well, yes, a terrible thing happened, but it's been 6 whole months. Shouldn't you be over it by now? And I think that that's a very hypocritical. So I've been very reluctant. It's not that I don't have my reservations about what's happening. I absolutely do. But I don't know that it's my place to point at Israel and say, you need to scale back now, tone it down, Israel, get over this. We didn't react that way, and I don't know very many people who would say that we should have. But I do wonder how much of the burden of what's happening now actually falls on our shoulders. I'm not saying that Saddam Hussein was, a great guy and we should have propped him up. But by undermining him and his country and his government and completely altering the balance of power in the Middle East, we created a room for Iran to be regional influencers. And so when I hear, oh, we need to eliminate Hamas, well, we didn't eliminate ISIS. I mean, we certainly cut ISIS back. We diminished their ability to do harm, but ISIS still exists, after our efforts. I don't know that Hamas can be eradicated. I don't know that Hezbollah can be eradicated as long as Iran is free to prop them up and encourage them and support them and promote them. And very little cost to Iran. It's not their soldiers who are carrying this out. So
But that's,
you asked me to.
I know, but that's a question, Richard.
Yeah,
We're talking about bigger powers. You and we're talking about a localized small war, Israel versus Hamas or versus terror, but this is
a proxy and we and Israel are not willing to confront Iran. So we tolerate Iran's undermining democracy in the Middle East, and I think maybe we have some culpability there. I could say about 12 other things, but I've said.
Yeah, but so what do you make of it? We can't change world geopolitics, but what do we do with that? We can. We did.
By doing what we did.
Oh, okay, we did.
There
But
was
I'm not going in to do that.
some interesting things in what you just said, and I appreciate it very, very much. Let me try and reach into some of the pieces, if I may. I think Israel is striving to combat Iran. There are many things that go on that we don't know the full extent of and have been going on for some time. These include cyber thwarting of their nuclear program, eliminating key nuclear officials, eliminating heads of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. None of this is pleasant, but it's a war that goes on. And just a month and a half ago, Israel dealt Iran a devastating defeat. Iran fired more than 300 deadly projectiles at the population of Israel that, aside from harming sadly, one young girl who happened to be an Arab Bedouin, there was no consequential damage. And so I think there are all sorts of things that go on, both directly and through Israel's continuing to combat the Iranian proxies. And then Judy, well, let me pick up on another thing about, can we eliminate Hamas? Well, one of the discussions I've heard among the podcasts I've listened to and I've thought about, did we eliminate Nazism? I would say no, that there are still those on the edges who hold Nazi beliefs. We see that. We see that in America. There's a neo-Nazi movement. What we did was we destroyed Nazism as a governing regime with a military capability. And that's the objective with Hamas. When we hear the phrase to destroy Hamas, Hamas is a terror regime. It's a terror government. It's not just a rogue group operating in Gaza Strip. It is the government. And the objective is to dismantle that government, destroy its infrastructure, neutralize and destroy its weapons capability, either kill, capture, or exile its leaders. That's not to suggest that there will never again be anyone in the Palestinian community who doesn't harbor Hamas-like ideas, but that's the objective. And finally, Judy said it, comparisons are good to a point, but sometimes they don't work perfectly. The United States and Iraq, and again, I don't want to get into the particulars of that. Iraq is 8,000 miles, I'm going to guess, from the United States. Okay. Hamas is 1 to 2 miles away from where Israelis live. And Hamas has said that its goal is to commit October 7th over and over and over and over again. So I was with somebody the other day, and they turned to me and they said, something just occurred to me. They said, it was someone who wasn't Jewish. They said, that person said he follows this, he thinks about it, he hears all the criticism of Israel and Netanyahu. He said, but he's never heard anyone suggest what Israel should do differently. And I've never heard it either. I have never heard anyone suggest what Israel should be doing otherwise than responding to a murderous attack, rooting out the perpetrators, ensuring that it never happens again, fighting an extraordinarily difficult, complex, almost unfathomable urban war. And despite the way it's been communicated, and you heard Elad say this, doing everything possible that one can do in a theater of war to minimize civilian casualties. So that's some of my thoughts in terms of the many things you just said, all of which I appreciate, and I appreciate where you were coming from.
Thank you. 2 more questions, if you don't mind staying a few more minutes. I'll promise I'll spring for not just lunch, but dinner next week. And I know some people have to leave at noon, but we have, so Kim and Arlene. Oh, Arlene, yeah. Do you want to be the final? Who wants to wrap up? One gets one.
Well, I'm non-Jewish, so I have more of a comment than a question.
Give us your comment, Kim. Kim was, Kim, I just to let you know, I love everybody in this room. I mean, even the ones I don't know. And Kim, we lost her beautiful husband, how many months ago?
coming up on 10.
10 months ago, he was a president of ruler, he just did every little piece of this building, and Kim, thank God, has stayed on with us. Has always been an interested and very involved honorary Jewish person. So here's her
Thank you,
comment.
thank you. No, I appreciate that, because my comment is sort of a perspective as a non-Jewish person who, became more aware of Israel and the Jewish community, 17, 18 years ago. And so I've had observations through, all of what's happened and the news coverage. And I just want to provide a little perspective and maybe something for you to think about when you're talking to your non-Jewish friends. And, I'm a very proud American, but by and large, we are not good at geography. Okay, so before I knew Dave, I really didn't know much about Israel. I kind of knew where it was, but I will tell you, most people that you talk to do not understand the size of Israel. And you talked about propaganda. And I think one of the things that is a subtle, maybe unintentional propaganda that frustrates me is on the news, whenever they show things about it, Gaza, they show this big map of Israel. And then here's little Gaza Strip. And then maybe they show a little tiny bit and they say, well, Egypt. And I will tell you, most people who, everybody in this room, you know Israel, you've studied it, you know everything. Most of the people in the United States who see that on CNN, they have this impression that Israel's this big country, and here's little Gaza. And you talked about that Israel's being painted as the aggressor. Well, you can totally see how that's happening when you present that. And I want to say to them, CNN, please pull back. That's not Egypt. That's a tiny portion of the Gaza Strip that you're showing. And so when I've talked to some people, and of course, as you know, a lot of my friends are non-Jewish, and so when things have happened since October 7th, and they've kind of asked me, because they sort of see me as, you know about Israel, you've been there. And I talked to them, I say, when you talk to your kids or whatever, ask them just a real basic question. I know everything's very complicated with what's going on, but a real quick question. How big is Israel? How big is it? Just ask them, how big? And they're like, oh. And I say, well, all right, compared to other countries in the Middle East. So Egypt, they were showing next to you. Just, how, are they of the same size? Are they different? Is Israel bigger than Egypt? And they don't know. And I say, Egypt is 40 times the size of Israel. Saudi Arabia is 100 times the size of Israel. So I would like to see, and I don't know how you can do this, and maybe this is a question for you, Richard, when you're talking to people, what's a good way to put some perspective on this and say, let's look at a map of the Arab world, or maybe the Muslim, I don't want to get into that discussion, but can we look at things as, because people are having this discussion about, oh, the land and the Palestinians lost their land and Israel's taking all their land. And so I think some of this would help if it's complicated, but let's get back down to something very simple, which is let's educate people. And you mentioned, Richard, that the evangelical Christians are often allies, and that's because they know where Israel is, and they could find it. They've looked at it on a map. It's important to them, and so I think one of the things that we can try to do as we're talking to the non-Jewish community is just help them understand this. This is a little tiny place compared to the rest of the world, and the Jewish population, is very small. I mean, it's 0.2% of the population. Muslims are like 20% of the population of the world. So just very basic things that it might even help as a first step for them to learn something that they don't know.
So those comments were superb. I'm going to, there's a map that's been used a number of years ago by an organization that They used to produce a book called Myths and Facts when people got books before online. And the cover was exactly what you're talking about. It was a map of the Middle East with Israel in a different color, which is like a little finger at most of this huge land expense, which is very effective. I will send it to Judy and ask her to share it with you and anyone else who is interested, because I think you make some superb points. And what I say to people, but the map dramatizes it. What I say to them is that I bet if I put a map up and the countries weren't named and asked you to find Israel, that most of you would not be able to do it. And I said, that's not an aspersion on any of you. It's so small. It's this tiny little strip of land that has been allotted to the Jewish people to have a tiny state. When I talk in Alabama to illustrate Israel's achievements, I always point out that the population of Israel is roughly equivalent to the population of only Alabama and Mississippi combined. And people are shocked. They think Israel's this powerful, big country. And I said, no, it's only about 9 million people. And, the land, I believe it said the square miles is about the same as New Jersey. Doesn't mean much to folks down here, though. It means a lot to me because I'm from New Jersey. But I will that you've raised some great points, and I will send that to Judy to distribute.
Thank you. Everybody here is a quality person, but we saved the very best for last. David, I know you're standing back there, but Arlene always has a pearl of wisdom in her question. And now she is gonna wrap us up with our final question. And I'm sorry if that puts pressure on you, but you always get something amazing.
Okay, Kim took one of the 3 things I was going to mention. Now I'll just do one. I'm sure everybody was relieved that they weren't handed a pledge card when they walked in the door. But,
Oh, darn.
but,
Mark, we forgot.
but I'm gonna ask the money question. Can you give us some suggestions about where to make financial contributions that have the lowest administrative costs and do the most good in Israel, what Israel needs right now?
You're directing that question to me?
Yes, could you hear it fully?
Sure, I heard it.
Okay.
Yes. What I would suggest is that Jewish Federations of North America, since October 7th, has run a Israel emergency campaign whereby 100% of the money goes to the beneficiaries in Israel for social services to support the people and the lives and the aspects of the country which were so severely disrupted. And as a federation director, I would always say, former federation, people would say, well, how can you say that 100% of the money? I said, because the system and infrastructure for the raising and distribution of money already exists. We're not adding anything. We're just able to do this. So I would suggest that you go to your local federation website or the Jewish Federations of North America website. And Judy, I know you want to end, but if you'll indulge me, I want to end it with one simple point that I emphasize in every talk I give to a group.
Wait, Ryan, did you want to jump in before his final thought, or do you want to do a final thought after his final thought?
Yeah.
I would actually, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm gonna close.
Okay, you're gonna close. All right. We just have a from the side. So go ahead, Richard. Thank you.
So the first thing I say to every group I speak to is this. I say, people say this is really a complicated situation in the Middle East involving Israel. And I say, no. I said, it's complicated in its manifestations, but it's simple at its core. And what I stress to everyone I speak to is, here is why it's simple at its core. The problem is what it's been for the last 100 years, what it is today, and that's the refusal of Israel's enemies to accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state on 1 inch of the historical homeland of the Jewish people. I said, that's the core of the conflict. It never has changed, and it never changes. And when it does, in terms of relationships with particular Arab states like Egypt and Jordan, then in exchange for peace and recognition and legitimacy, Israel has made all sorts of territorial compromises. But the key issue, Israel vis-a-vis the confrontational states in the Arab Muslim world and their allies, remains simple. It's just what I said. It's the refusal of those enemies to accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state on 1 inch of the historical, biblical homeland of the Jewish people. And people get that. And the reason they get it is because it simplifies it, and it is a enduring, sad to say, truth. And so that's something that I always strive to communicate. And I thank you. I know somebody else is going to conclude, so I thank you all for this wonderful opportunity. I've been to Dayton a couple of times. I've been to your congregation. I may have met some of you, and it's I really, really appreciate the opportunity to spend this morning with you.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm sorry, Ryan Levin. I'm a member of the temple and on the board of directors. I just want to say, Richard, thank you so much for coming and participating with us today. That was my takeaway is, like a lot of Jews, sometimes we're confounded with this notion of why don't people see this straight? And I felt very frustrated about what I could do to make an impact. And I think my takeaway from you today was very motivating, very challenging, that I have to be an ambassador. We have to be ambassadors for our culture, for our religion, for our state of Israel, to defend that. And being patient enough to hear them on that emotional level and be a counselor. Because if you're not ready to be a counselor to somebody, you're not ready to necessarily enter that conversation. And you have to have your emotional quotient very high for that. So that was amazing. And that was my big takeaway today. And I'm going to be that ambassador. The last thought I have is just because you're not Jewish does not mean that you don't have eyes, that you can't see Hamas has, and the line 1, destruction of Israel. That isn't put out there on CNN very much, these sorts of things. So yes, you have an opinion. You absolutely can't speak on your behalf because you have eyes and you're here and you care, you're objective. And that was my one thought. And the last thought is, we don't have the benefit of being critical of our mother Israel. You don't have that benefit anymore, my friends. It's a ship. I liken the state of Israel to a ship that can sink if you don't take care of it in every aspect of it. We can't second guess the captain on the direction he's going that day. You can't second guess the motivations and the tactic being used. And I'm afraid that most of you, God bless you, don't have the stomach for that kind of violence and warfare. And that is why it is regrettably necessary for you to understand and support Israel, even though the ugliness that ensues. So, none of you have ever probably prosecuted a war and understand what it takes to do that. And that is the state of Israel. You have to have faith in the generals and these folks to do the right thing. Coincidence, my idea shared it. But that is it. Support Israel, be an ambassador, and don't let the ship sink. Thank you.
Oh. Richard, thank you so much for joining us this first time.
Yes.
We will stay here and finish the leftovers, and whatever is left after that, I'm going to pack up and bring to your house next week. on my grandma's trip, just to remind us once again that we share beautiful grandchildren. So thank you one and all for your thoughtful responses, your ability to stick with this, and may this be a first step to peace. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you all.
Well,